All right. I have a message that the meeting is now streaming live on YouTube.
It's so funny. It goes to you faster than it gets to me. Oh. Okay, now you're live.
All right. Welcome everybody to Biotensegrity Party number 6. Cheers from all over the world.
Yay.
I'm
Cheers.
Susan Lowell de Solorzano. Cheers, cheers, cheers. I'm
Great
here
to
in
see you
Washington,
again.
D.C. There's my co-host, Chris Clancy. Chris is in Vancouver. Graham, say hello.
Hello.
Graham's in Nottingham. Chris, did you say hello? I think you did. Are we?
Hi from Deep Cove, Vancouver.
Hi to everybody. So this is going to be a long one, everybody. I hope you got the word on that. We have guests, Leonid Blum. Hi, Leonid.
Hello, hello.
And Steve Levin. Hey, Steve.
Hi.
Hi, Steve.
Hi there.
And we want to thank our sponsors. So this is going on to the Biotensegrity Archive website, YouTube channel. And so they're part of what's allowing this to all happen. Embodied Biotensegrity, that's Chris Clancy's organization. She's got some great Biotensegrity education material there if you want to check it out. And it's through her tech mama stuff that we get to do this. And Handspring Publishing. I think all 5 of us presenting today have done one thing or another with Handspring. So that's great. And we've had a lot of Handspring authors on. So thank you to them as well. So one more time, cheers.
Cheers.
Yes.
Now I am going to attempt to open up our little session by sharing my screen. So hang with me. I know, right? Let's see if it works. How does that look?
Good. Good.
All right. So welcome to Biotensegrity Party number 6. What this is being recorded. Yes, continue. I just got the message. So we're going to be going over some new frontiers in Biotensegrity today. All right. This is a mock-up of my Halloween costume from many years back, actually, when I was teaching at a K-8 school. So I got a t-shirt and I wrote a bunch of math equations all over it. And I went to school and I got 2 kinds of reactions. There were people who said, "What's with the t-shirt?" And a whole other group of people said, "Ugh, that is scary." So all I want to say is there will be math today, but you don't have to do any equations. You're not going to have to read any equations. It's going to be a different kind of math that we've been getting into lately. So just sit back and enjoy it. Another thing to keep in mind is that, we're people who like to be sure of things. So we like to measure, but we like to measure to the extent that we like to do it even when something is unmeasurable. So just keep that in mind as we're going through the material as well. We're going to cover a lot. Pace yourself, hang in there. We promise it will be worth it. And I'll tell you more about this slide later. So with that, I am going to turn it over to Leonid. I'm going to stop my share.
Okay.
And that means that, Leonid, you got to start yours.
Okay, let me try to get my performance here. Let's do that. How is the visibility?
Good.
Good. All right. Wait. Slideshow from the beginning. All right. Okay, so welcome everybody. I'll try to sort of stick to the promise from Susan, not to get too much of math, right? And the whole thing is that these new frontiers actually comes from the like 10 days of the conversations that we had at Steve's place, Biotensegrity home base back in January. We were kind of quite lucky to get there before this whole work from home and the work world paralyzed thing happened. And like we were really busy with the way how we can get to the next level in the presentation and explanations. And what I really want to start today is this like simplistic but really important slide. So if you read the yellow thing, right? So what does it say? It says that is a given framework rigid or flexible in a given space? This is a basic question that doesn't arrive conveniently labeled as a problem in algebra or analysis or any other field. What does it actually mean? It means a very simple thing. There is no ready-made math for telling whether a given framework or a given structure, whether it's stable, unstable, flexible, and so on. And what is, let me just first get some clarifications. What is a framework, right? Because we really have to get this very, very clear on the terms. So the framework is the most general term for any multi-element structure. So as you can see here, a body is a structure, as you can see with that particular lady. And where am I with the Zoom tools? Yeah, here. Yeah. So, but then what I wanted to say is this, is that as we move on, the most important thing here is to understand the next step, that once we move to the analysis of all these structures, we really have to get into the important thing. We are so familiar with this particular label that, we look at those types of the representations, skeletons with lines and with dots and so on, that we take them for real as a good enough start for the analysis of the biomechanics, and we are easily buying into the idea of the alignments, angles, and all this other stuff. And what I'm trying to bring here today is that by even just looking at that picture and sort of connecting it to your hands-on experience with the human body, you are sort of entering a contract. And Mariana, like long time ago, she said like something which I quote until today. She said, wait, look, Mr. Bloom, between me and math, we don't go together. And what was my reply? My reply was that the moment you measured the first range of motion, not even measured, the moment you clicked it in your brain in terms of the range of motion, you already entered a mathematical contract. And it's up to you whether you're going to read the small print or whether you are not going to read the small print. This is really the critical point. So, and what we are going to try, my whole introduction today is actually try to give you a little bit of this small print before Steve moves on to do the elegant presentation with some heavy lifting. Right, obviously I grabbed this kind of things from the internet, right, and that's what it says. So you've got the contract in capital letters, that's what biomechanics and their functional anatomy gives us, and then, like what else do we see in big letters? Sucker, right? So basically, this is how not to be a sucker and learn to read the small print. That's what we are looking at. So once again, what is the first thing that we really have to learn is that because there is no ready-made math for the analysis of the frameworks, so what does it mean? There are no ready-made transparencies. And I will return to this kind of thing over and over again. And I will maybe make you bored with it, but I really want to drive this point. So all these familiar pictures, yesterday I typed a wrong posture into Google and it gave me, I don't know how many millions of pictures and references. All of them are being this kind of thing. But it's important to understand that once we realize there is no ready-made math, this is the biomechanical art. This is not science in the science way, it's art, because it makes, a lot of the small print before getting into this assumption. So this stuff I started pulling from the ResearchGate. And in the ResearchGate, you're going to find, again, hundreds of papers which start with this kind of representations of the human bodies, which are moving inside and creating, reconstructing these frameworks based on those dots and points. And this is really the first thing that we have to get to do. And well, you see there are the big letters, and then what we have to do, we have to learn to read the small mathematical and engineering print if we don't want to be confused and don't want to get into this sucker space. So now, what is the key term here? Since we don't know, that we don't have the ready-made math, we have to understand that we, and by we mean like everybody, whether it's people in their like best labs of the best universities, or whether it's just a kind of local practitioner, we don't know how the external forces, including the famous gravitation, we don't know how the internal forces resolve internally. And that's really the terminology that we have to learn. See, this is what is used there as a terminology. Force resolution. Forces act from the outside, internally they get resolved. That's their proper engineering term. And what I put into this simple thing, we don't know whether the thing is going to hold or collapse. And it starts with even small things like this mini examples here. So when the exact analysis is not possible, the only way to deal with it is to idealize. Meaning that we want to know and get some best information on how the loads, vibrations, settlements, and all this kind of changes are going to, from the outside, are going to change into what happens inside. And that is for what science tries to build mathematical and structural models. And what I want you to realize is that idealization is not reality. It's a conversion. Even though this looks fanciful, mathematical, when you look at this kind of, this sort of graphs, they look fanciful, mathematical. And when you look at the, like the projection of the human body, it doesn't look like anything particular. So the key terms that we have to learn and that we have to keep in our understanding to be able to deal with the small print are these two things: static and kinematic, and idealizations, which make the structural analysis. And there are two words here: determinancy and indeterminancy. What do they mean? You see, if you look here at this whole point, you'll see that determinate structures, the structures with determinacy, these are the ones for which internal force resolutions are known. In other words, so whatever acts from the outside, we know the exact distribution between the members and joints where the forces will go. We know their paths. But that is only possible and only available for very simple structures. That's why we're getting back to this. There is no ready-made math. So the indeterminate structures are the ones where we don't know the internal force resolutions. So key terms which we will try to use afterwards: forces resolution, that's the internal path of the external forces within the framework. members and joints. That will be critical at the second part of my presentation because this is really important. There's so much confusion in the word joint because we tend to think in joints and bones, but the fact is that joints and members, that's a part of the larger notion of the structural analysis, and that's where most of the tricks and confusions are. But one of the most important things that you have to see here is the idea of the virtual cut. It sounds weird, but that's what structural analysis does. You see, this is the original structure, for example, like this is whatever, any kind of bar or something like this, right? So I'm trying to do it here, right? So this is the original structure. Imagine that that was the body that you saw from the outside. Now, when it's indeterminate, nobody knows what to do with it. So what does structural analysis make as a trick? They install what they call the virtual cuts. And the virtual cut is made out of some common sense and out of the intuition. If you ever, that's why hundreds of thousands of engineering students, they hate structural analysis courses. Because doing the virtual cuts, it's such a crazy and tricky art that the moment it kind of gets more complex, everybody is completely confused. But this is how it's all based. The virtual cuts, well, that's what is the whole meaning of the entire transition. Do the virtual cuts to convert the unresolvable and indeterminate structure into the structure with kinematic determinacy. So this is my central point. Even those things that we grew up through the kinesiology textbooks, they are idealizations, they are not reality, and we have to be very careful with existent realizations and the small prints, and we have to be very open for the new idealizations. And few more points here. You see, when we deal with these idealized structures, biomechanics looks very complex. Why? Because if you look here, you're going to see these things. There is a lot of technical math based on virtual cuts. You can do all sorts of these different methods. I wouldn't even label them, you can read, right? Strain, energy, slope, deflection, and then so they will have tons of inflection of the equations and the computer methods, but they are all based on the way how you made the original virtual cuts. What did you assign? How did you make this transition from indeterminate to determinate? And this is really the central point that I want to nail down, that organisms, biological organisms, are impenetrable in that sense. They are structurally indeterminate frameworks, whether it's people, elephants, fish, and so on. And this is really one of the central points that we have to start with, that the human body has to be seen right off the bat as a structural black box, which is statically indeterminate and kinematically indeterminate structural framework. But how can we approach this black box challenge? So first thing, we have to accept our knowledge limits. Be humble, not arrogant. We can solve it. We know, this is moves like that. This is moves like that. We know nothing. We have to start with this. It's a thing which has millions and millions of elements and millions of resolution paths. So we don't know anything. So, and then we have two paths. So the best that we can expect is to get from black box to gray box. But there are two ways of doing it. So first path is a standard scientific path, which has been like a tradition for the last 200-300 years. So start with as if white box knowledge, right? So you take the most simplistic thing, you assume that you know everything, that you can do a kinematic and static determinacy, and then once you solve it, then you start injecting little by little the black dye and making it little by little, making it more grayish. That's a standard path. But now we are looking for the second approach, like with the new 21st century science, the algorithmic approaches, combinatoric approaches, and so on. We have the opportunity to get into the completely new level when we can start with the general solution for the universal black box and then whiten it with the sort of subsets within. And I will show more, and Steve will get there. So fundamentally, if we look at the history of Steve himself, what was his central point? Back in the 60s, he expressed this fundamental disagreement with biomechanics at the level of this white box solution, making the numbers and calculations and saying, well, there are 900 kilos of loads, whatever, at the lumbar spine and all this kind of stuff. So that's a disagreement with the white box approach, assuming that the biological systems were kinematically determined without fully disclosing this small print to end users. So that's really the central point. There is no white box for structural biology. And what does it mean in practical terms? Millions of pictures that you see like this, and probably, I must admit, most of you are using in your practice to show to clients. This is bullshit. Okay? So because this is any see-through body alignment images are purely speculative, like purely. It's based on a very weak assumptions about members and joints and a very weak approach to structural analysis. The moment people start do more and start drawing blocks, angles, and so on, that's from being purely speculative, it becomes super speculative. And if the person does something like this, assigning numbers, right? It's a quite famous line, which is, I think it's from Eric Dalton, no disrespect to him, but this is the one with the conversation about the 42 pounds head. This is exactly like taking it further and assigning it to the mega speculative thing. So this is the base that we have to start, right? Because a lot of people in our field, they're all happy with holistics and kind of all being nice and soft and so on. But then at the same time, we have to put our science where we are with our philosophy. And otherwise, those things are incompatible. And this is really, we're getting back to the black box. And that's what we have to start with. People are real, see-through conclusions are speculative. We have to be open to different assignments and so on. And what we've been looking at, we've been looking for the most generalized solutions for all frameworks. What keeps them stable? And this is important thing, right? So you see, this is a snapshot from one of my, folders on my computer where there's a whole bunch of this advanced mathematical articles and so on. Why do we go to this crazy mathematical stuff, which is kind of complex in the way that it's written? Because there is this, when we go for the gray box quest, there is this pyramid. What you saw in that explanation of the drawings, what was there, what you face from the biomechanics is this, is the technical math. Technical math has methods, and there are dozens of methods, force field methods, strain energy method, there are lots of them, but they all belong here to the technical math. And when Steve spent years trying to battle with people from the biomechanics, what was happening? He was doing exactly this. He was talking to them from this perspective of tensegrity, but they were just kind of saying, hey, you know what, Mr. Levin, you don't know technical math well enough. We are going to drag you into this, onto this tatami and going to wrestle you throughout all these equations. But what we can see now, where we should look at, there is two more levels, out of which the main one is the pure math. This is the source math. And of course, most of you didn't study math, so what I thought about the analogy for you to understand. So if technical math, that's what you as a consumer meet at the restaurants and dishes. So that's menus and diets. Applied math would be the whole way how you do the cooking methods. Microwaves, frying, roasting, boiling, and all the transformations that it does to materials. And then pure math, this is like the highest level. This is the very source, the general understanding of nutrition and the food processing principles. So when we have problem with the local diet, we are not supposed to, one avenue is to try another diet, another menu, change a restaurant. That's what biomechanics is about. But then we are now talking about different levels and saying, hey guys, we have to go back to the original food processing principles. We have to go back to the very source. And if we look at it from this perspective, this is what it means. So technical math, it services industry needs by multiple math methods, but it works within the preset and fixed assumptions. It doesn't question assumptions. So if you talk to a person from the biomechanics, if you start questioning the assumptions, they don't understand you because they can discuss different methods, but they wouldn't question the assumption because it belongs to the applied and the pure math source. And one of my favorite things is that you see, for example, today, if you look at the applied math in, for example, the construction, when they analyze something as simple as concrete beams, right? The beams that you get in the construction, there are 5 different maths coexisting which are being used for the analysis of the beams. And my natural question is, how come that when we come to a framework which is much more complex, the biological organism, we are supposed to go away with one math? That is the central question. This is the central questioning of the entire small print. And what we are looking at, here, we want to go back to the source, to the most abstract concepts, to the disembodied and immaterial relationship. We want to solve it, the principle of the stability of the framework for the most general solution. That's what we want. And if you want to get the transition here, this is how it would look like. You see, there are 4 paths here. One path is the one which is familiar. This is where we all start from school. School geometry. From pure math, it's a very simple concept and it uses very simple methods. What is biomechanics? It keeps the simple concepts, but then starts using very complex methods. If you were scared by math at school, and most of people who go into the hands-on professions, they were, then you were already traumatized by these simple concepts and simple methods. So when somebody brings complex methods, he has complete authority over you. He would just wrestle and drag you and win very easily. So what is the pure math which is now developing? These are complex concepts and complex methods. This is all this kind of fancy, like logical reasoning and so on, which exists in the combinatorial geometry and the algorithmic geometry and so on. But the good thing is these people got interested in these frameworks. So they bring this amazing, intellectual capacities towards this. And what we are looking at with Tensegrity is this. that this is an amazing thing where we are able to find the concept which is fundamentally complex because it comes to the highest level of the abstract reasoning, but at the same time, it has the simple methods which we can actually directly convert and translate into the hands-on interpretation, diagnostics, feedback, and all kind of these things. So that's really the introduction in what we want to do, what kind of led to the new frontiers in tensegrity. And now I'm going to pass the torch to Dr. Levin, who is going to produce one of his famous and elegant presentations. On that, I stop sharing and pass it to him.
And I'm going to jump in between and just say that you can, even though we're not going to go to questions and discussion until everything is over, but we will hang out and do that. If you do want to put your questions in to the Zoom chat, or I think even the YouTube chat, we've got people monitoring that as well. Go ahead and we'll try to get to as many questions as we can at the end. So I'll also let you know that in terms of schedule, after Steve's presentation, we'll do a little station identification kind of break, and just say a few words about our sponsors and things like that, upcoming Biotensegrity parties. And then after that little break, we'll jump in again. I'll have a short introduction, really like 3 slides, before we hear from Graham. And then I'll do a longer presentation, and then Leonid will be back. So we've got a lot going on today. Hang in there, pace yourselves.
Yeah, and
Steve, are you ready?
Don't forget
ready,
the
I'm
video,
good.
that we have the video recordings, right? Afterwards.
Yes, this is recording. It's also going live on YouTube. And as soon as we stop it, it'll be up on YouTube. It's pretty quickly there. Steve, I can't hear you very well. Will you speak again?
Here I am. Can you hear me?
Yeah, it's good.
I would love to be able to hear you a little more kind of
Well,
loud and clear.
Steve,
I'm
if
loud.
you take your cursor down to the up arrow beside the mute, and then you can click on select a microphone. Actually, audio settings at the bottom of that list.
Steve, you muted yourself. You have to unmute yourself. Bottom left. That's it.
All right, I did that. All right, my audio settings are up there
Do you want to make them a bit louder?
in volume. Looks good on mine.
Maybe we're just all louder than you. So if you could drag it a little to the right, then
I'm trying to, it won't drag anymore. Let me see.
oh,
This one's my internal one here.
Oh, that's better already. Do that again.
Oh, I just did. Okay. You
Yes.
hear? Is it better?
Yes.
Oh, that's nice. Okay. All right. Well, thank you, Leonid, because Leonid, I have to listen to Leonid 2 or 3 times before I understand what he said. And this time I understood it better than ever before. But back in January, when we had our little session here, Graham and Leonid and Susan and I got together to try to solve the problems of the universe. And Leonid introduced the concept of, actually brought into the concept of what is controlling that black box, what are the parameters around that black box that he talks about. And he brought in the concept of superstability. And so this talk is about superstability. And I was clever enough to make it as a movie so I didn't have to remember anything and didn't have to talk. It does lose some of this spontaneity, but it'll get the story across, I think. So this is about superstability, one of the parameters that of the black box that comes from actually understanding the second law of thermodynamics. All right, let me see if, oh, I got to get to
Screen share to start.
Screen share, QuickTime Player, and play this mother. All right, we was superstability, biotensegrity, the superstability hypothesis for biological structural organization. Mr. Churchill, to what do you attribute your success in life? Conservation of energy. Never stand up when you can sit down, never sit down when you can lie down, never stay awake when you can be asleep. This transposes into the second law of thermodynamics and is consistent with Charles Darwin in his thesis of survival of the fittest, is really talking about the second law of thermodynamics. My friend Sergei Grekovetsky put it very succinctly. Species survival is subject to the second law of thermodynamics. So when we're looking at the biological architecture, we're looking for biological least energy architecture, which is stability with minimal energy expenditure, mobility with minimal energy expenditure, and the ability to switch back and forth easily, also with minimal energy expenditure. How can we go from a pile of bones to an upright skeleton that supports itself? Well, you really can't, not without the soft tissue tensional elements. In Greek mythology, Atlas was a Titan caught up in the battle between the Olympians and the Titans. The Titans lost, and Atlas was condemned to spend eternity as a column holding up the heavens. So modeling the body as a column has a long history. This soldier is from a book of 1889 on the center of gravity of the human body, where they were trying to figure out the best way to load a soldier's equipment so he was in balance, meaning he was functioning as a column. Which brings us to Ida Rolf and her famous stack of blocks body alignment. Here the plumb line goes directly through the center of the ankle joint. The currently accepted model is the inverted pendulum model, but we have a problem here because the center of mass doesn't fall through the center of the ankle, but rather anterior to it, creating a torque at the ankle joint itself. This could be troublesome, but it's even more troublesome in the 1889 soldier, where the center of gravity falls anterior to his toes, which would make him tilt over and fall on his face. This would require an external force to push him back, as the muscles can't do it, as they're an internal force. To make any sense of this, let's talk about three columns: the Washington Monument, the Eiffel Tower, and Snelson's Tensegrity Tower. Let's start with the Washington Monument, which is 169 meters tall. It's 10.5 meters thick walls at the base and 1.5 meter thick walls at the top, and weighs an astonishing 74,600 metric tons. It is built like the Greek columns, block on block, gravity-dependent rigid structures that has dominated our concept of body alignment and posture. Vertical columns can be bad news. Everyone knows that once the center of mass of the Tower of Pisa falls outside its base, the tower will fall over. But not only will towers fall over, they will pull themselves apart because of developing internal shear within the structure, which is really a tensional force. But tall columns don't have to fall over to create internal shear. Just the mere weight of the column itself creates shear and tension within the column. The tension is a destabilizing force pulling the column apart. So a column contains the seeds of its own destruction, put there by its own weight. So columns are both held together and pulled apart by the forces of gravity. And if a lighthouse tower was made of compliant material, it would look like this. A column is only a column when it is vertical. Lying on its side, it becomes a beam. A beam is how you might describe a quadruped spine suspended on posts. Hang a beam between two posts and it bellies out. A beam also has intrinsic forces that will pull it apart. Its own weight will create a compression force above its neutral axis and a tension force below its neutral axis. But the spine is not a solid beam, it's more like a chain. And a chain put in this situation would give you another problem. You just couldn't hold it tight enough to keep it straight, and you would end up having a sway back nag. Now here we have a proper horse that we're using for a posted lintel model. Even if we could stiffen the spine, there's still several other problems that we would have to contend with in a posted lintel model. We still have to contend with gravity pushing down on the beam, causing compression and then tension forces, and then transmitting it into the post. But look what happens when it gets in the post. It splits up, you get a shear force and then a lateral force, so the walls are pushing out. The Roman arch, this one in Segovia, Spain, they share a similar story. I think I've lost my sound here a minute. Let me move it back. So columns are both held together and pulled apart by the forces of gravity. And if a lighthouse tower, sorry about that. Force like this. A column is only a column when it is vertical. Lying on its side, it becomes a beam. A beam is how you might describe a quadruped spine suspended on posts. Hang a beam between two posts and it bellies out. A beam also has intrinsic forces that will pull it apart. Its own weight will create a compression force above its neutral axis and a tension force below its neutral axis. But the spine is not a solid beam, it's more like a chain. And a chain put in this situation would give you another problem. You just couldn't hold it tight enough to keep it straight, and you would end up having a sway back nag. Now here we have a proper horse that we're using for a posted lintel model. Even if we could stiffen the spine, there's still several other problems that we would have to contend with in a posted lintel model. We still have to contend with gravity pushing down on the beam, causing compression and then tension forces, and then transmitting it into the post. But look what happens when it gets in the post. It splits up, you get a shear force and then a lateral force, so the walls are pushing out. The Roman arch, this one in Segovia, Spain, they share a similar story. It allows for spanning a greater distance between posts, but it also pushes out the pillars and walls. If you use the arch for a model of the pelvis, as is frequently done, you end up with forces pushing the femur out, not just down. Long arch spans, such as depicted here in the Pont d'Avignon, present their problems. In this situation, you'll get a force that creates collapsing forces that will crack the structure, and the outward forces then pull it apart. It is the compression that creates the tension, and lest we forget, it is gravity that creates the compression. Let's move on to the Eiffel Tower. It's about twice as tall as the Washington Monument and about 1/10 of weight. Back in my surgical days, I attended a conference on the spine in Paris, and this was the frontispiece of the cover. Although taller and lighter than a stone structure, it actually is more stable, and it could bend like this in theory and still stand, not fall over and not pull itself apart. It could go from a column to a beam, remain rigid, and not develop sway back. The secret is in its triangular framework, which is readily apparent just looking at the photographs. Triangles are magical. If you load it at its apex, the forces angle out towards its base, and by some miraculous mechanical manifestation, all the shear forces and tension that would normally tear it apart are actually put to work holding it together. Sorry, people. I don't control the machine. Getting nothing out of it. It died on me. Can you hear me? Well, everybody's frozen.
We can hear you talking, Steve, but we can't hear anything from the video.
The video stopped and I can't see you. My whole screen's frozen up.
Uh-oh.
So
Do you want to log off and then come back on again?
I think if I can find out, I can't even get that to happen right now. Nothing's happening.
Okay,
Right.
how about this? Susan, can you hear me? You're muted if you unmute.
It just started again.
Oh, great.
All
Okay.
right.
Hey,
It's-
Steve.
It just started again. Just the belly.
Oh, okay.
Okay, we're back
We're
here.
holding it together. Tension and compression sort of separate from one another, and forces are normalized downward with no shear. So again, compression begets tension, and compression gets there because of gravitational forces. Triangles are the only two-dimensional structures that do not deform under pressure. A triangle exhibits emerging properties. These are characteristics that cannot be predicted by examining its component parts. You always have to consider the function of the mesostructure. The triangle is a unit, which overrides the functions of the microstructure, the component parts of the triangle. Even when trusses are constructed with rigid materials, we should always be cognizant of the fact that some of the members are under tension and could be replaced by cables. Let's go back to our person standing on a beam. Notice the belly in the beam. Replace that beam, say with a truss bridge. The bellying of the beam is eliminated. Now pay attention to the loads on the abutments. You all, of course, remember how the loads on the abutments in the arch were distributed, where there was a force pushing out against the walls. Not so in a truss. This is a roof truss. And you see all the forces are distributed normal, that is at right angles to the ground. Triangles have emerging qualities, and they are to be calculated using their meso properties is not always appreciated by even formally trained physicists. Any frame that is not a triangle is unstable. They will collapse of their own weight. Trusses are inherently stable and take a compression load and distribute it into compression and tension using pin joints that are torque free. In 3 dimensions, you have a tetrahedral truss with compression in its more vertical limbs and tension in its space. I'm getting a little ahead of myself, but tensegrities are transformable truss structures. As I have mentioned, some physicists do not understand triangles, nor do they understand tensegrities. Here we have an example of that by Dr. Patrick Johnson, a PhD physicist and Alexander Technique practitioner. It is an excerpt from his YouTube presentation, which is presently available, and I will let him tell his own story.
Let's take 100 kilos and put one block on a tensegrity structure and another block just on 3 rods. The question is, which one has more pressure along the line of the rods? And I'll give you a few seconds to think about this and come up with an answer. You can pause the video if you want. The answer is this one. Has more compression along the rods. In fact, if you do the calculation, you find that easily for this kind of angle, the pressure can be as much as twice as much or more.
Rather than just doing the calculations, let's put this to the experimental test. I have here two frame structures comparable to the model that Dr. Johnson shows. I'll load them with beakers and add buckshot and watch and see how the frames distort. As you can see, it takes twice the amount of buckshot to distort the triangulated frame structure than it does the square frame structure. Dr. Johnson fails to recognize the emergent properties of triangles and instead deconstructs the triangle and measures each structure separately. There are a few more errors in Dr. Johnson's presentation, but I think you get the point. Dr. Johnson does say some very nice things about biotensegrity. He just gets his physics wrong. Behold the famed Firth of Forth Bridge, a two-armed cantilevered truss bridge, late 19th century architectural marvel. The justly famed naturalist Darcy Thompson looked at it and thought, we could use this to model a dinosaur. Thompson understood that there were compression members and tension members in a truss, and that the bridge and the dinosaur needed both. He envisioned the compression elements as bones and the tension elements as the ties. To paraphrase him, seeing the skeleton of a dinosaur was like seeing a railroad track without the ties. And here is the current version of it at the Smithsonian Museum, Washington, D.C. Let's get back to our rigid beam, where tension is part of the problem. In a truss bridge, and here in a Fink truss, tension becomes part of the solution. In the Fink truss and in some subsequent examples, it's clear what is tension and what is compression. Anatomists and biomechanics could now envision that fascia, ligaments, and muscles could be tension components of a truss bridge, consistent with Darcy Thompson's model. In a frontal view, the upright spine certainly does look like a column, but of course we all know that this is a deception. But to humor the powers that be, we will continue with this deceit for now. Euler's narrow upright column bends because of the tensional forces within it, which, of course, are the resultant of the external compressive forces of gravity. Just as done in the Fink truss, we can externalize some of the tensional forces to relieve the inner tension. And that gets us to the Pupten model for stabilizing the spine. Take note of the fact that the ropes are attached to the ground. And then we have the ever popular shipmast model, which shows up in Volume 1, Issue 1 of the journal Spine, 1976. To stabilize a long, thin column, you need a lot of ropes. The internal shear that develops is not in one place, but all along the shaft of the column, causing a bending moment requiring multiple tensioners along the slender shaft. And only then do we have stability. None of that happens unless the cables are attached to the ground. The ground is...
Let's do it again. I think we just have to be patient and hope for the best.
But it certainly does look like a column. But of course, the internal shear that develops is not in one place, but all along the shaft of the column, causing a bending moment requiring multiple tensioners along the slender shaft. And only then do we have stability. None of that happens unless the cables are attached to the ground. The ground is
Stuck again.
Steve?
a system that
There we
can
go.
do the job, and it is one I've already alluded to. This is the Hirshhorn Museum on the National Mall in Washington, D.C., and sitting in this corner, but invisible in the photograph, is our third tower, Snelson's The Needle Tower, sitting there since 1974. This is a 60-foot tower of compression struts floating within a pre-tension network of cables. This is an architectural arrangement given the label of Tensegrity by Buckminster Fuller. These can be organized in a remarkable array of shapes and sizes from micro to macro. They are lightweight and have omnidirectional stability, and their internal structure is unaffected by gravitational forces. Rather than compression begetting tension, tension begets compression, with the compression elements floating within a sea of tension. To show how this might be applicable to the vertebral skeleton, let's look at bone. We usually think of bone being compressed by gravitational forces pulling us into the ground, with the resultant ground reaction force pushing back. But in utero, where the bones initially form, there is no compression loading in a gravity field. Bone is formed by the tensional forces pulling towards the central hub. In a tensegrity model, it would be a compression element created by the tension network. It has taken me 17 minutes to get to the actual subject matter of the talk. It would be so much more energy efficient and therefore more consistent with the second law of thermodynamics if the architecture of organisms were inherently stable rather than inherently unstable. Which brings us to Robert Connolly, a professor of mathematics at Cornell University, who showed mathematically that tensegrities have a quality called superstability, and we are integrating that concept with biotensegrity. Here in simple non-mathematical terms, we have a graph that exhibits the varying stabilities, gravity-loaded compression structures going from the least stable to the most stable. Logically, we should be able to continue this line until we hit superstability, but that never happens. The compression frame structure's curve flattens out and never makes it to superstability. If we place our architectural columns along this line, you could see the Washington Monument there, the arches there, the Eiffel Tower further up the curve, and then we hit the spider web right on the line. It is there we hit a crossover point where the curve of the line is disrupted. There is a leap up into superstability and an explosion into the realm of tension frame tensegrity structures. And there is no going back. There may be a range within tensegrity, but there is no sliding back into instability. This is Snelson's Tensegrity Tower being erected in the corner of the Hershaw Museum. It is being positioned in place by a few guys pulling on some wires and giving a little bit of a push. Tension is in the system before it's erected. Tension begets compression. Compression elements are independent of gravitational forces, and it is mathematically super stable. Let's remind ourselves what we're looking for. We're looking for stability with minimal energy expenditure and mobility with minimal energy expenditure. Tensegrity with its superstability seems to be a clear first choice for stability. And that brings us to mobility with instability. Tensegrity trusses are gravity independent and structurally transmutable, and they can flip from one stable configuration to another equally stable form. The forces within them are like the foam in your beer that is continually reorganizing itself, going from one stability to another. So if we are looking for stability in our towers, there's a clear choice in the Tensegrity Tower. Tensegrity is the superstability structure that we can use with various combinations and permutations to model organic structure from viruses to vertebrates. There are systems and subsystems. It works equally well at the picometer, nanometer, micrometer, millimeter, centimeter, and full organism level. The second law of thermodynamics dictates that it's time to replace the outmoded column model with the new superstable tensegrity model.
Well, sorry for the technical difficulties, but that's computers for you.
You know, it's the material that's the most important thing, Steve. And I think that got across beautifully.
Well, yeah, I said we'll see what technically we can do with it. Let's see, how do I get out of this? Stop screen sharing. There we are.
There we go. All right. So, hey, we've got some more people on. Hi, Brad. Great to see you. Wonderful. So what we're going to do is sort of a little bit of a stretch break before we come back and do a whole bunch more. Stay with us if you can. It is recording live on YouTube, and it will all be up there later on. So we want to thank Handspring Publishing. They're giving a coupon to our Biotensegrity Party participants. If you subscribe to the email list for the Stephen M. Levin Biotensegrity Archive, that's at biotensegrityarchive.org, then you'll get it in the email as well. I think Chris is putting it in the chat right now.
Yeah.
So thank you, Chris. Thank you so much for being the tech mama here. This would not be possible. Chris, maybe a year and a half ago, you started with embodied biotensegrity, doing a lot of great biotensegrity teaching online. I mean, it's hard to find quality material. You and I came across a course being offered this week, something that was actually recorded 3 years ago. I don't want to name names, but it was clear from a number of us who looked at the description that these people that maybe had a very sort of cursory beginner's level understanding of biotensegrity from our perspective, again, based on what they described as something the course was featuring. And it's one of the reasons we started the archive was to make sure there was a place where people could come to and know that they could get reliable information about biotensegrity. So Chris has been doing a great job of that, and I recommend you check out Embodied Biotensegrity if you want to go deeper. We've been having a great time in her Movement Mentors program, and I can't even remember all the, is it too late for people to jump into shifting paradigms even though we're on part
No,
2?
we're starting with part 2 on the 7th. Our first meeting is on the 12th of May, but people can take part 1 now and we'll catch up by the replays. And right now, actually, I also have a 28-day free trial for the Biotensegrity Trailblazers. That's where we have Biotensegrity Book Club. We are discussing Graham's health and disease. What is the difference paper on Wednesday this week. And yeah, we're so happy to continue the conversation.
That's great.
Do we want to talk about the BFS?
Yeah, we can do that. And I also want to just mention, you should all know, anybody who's on the archive mailing list already knows, Graham has a great website, tensegrityandbiology.co.uk. Do I have it right, Graham? Yes, he's nodding and putting his thumbs up. He's muted. Everybody trying to learn about this should really start at biotensegrity.com, Steve's website. And after you've read every single paper there, and you've read Graham's book and everything on Graham's website, and Danielle Claude Martin's book, and Maren Deal's book, then maybe you're ready to start getting deeper into it.
Susan, where can people download the Biotensegrity 101?
That is up on the Biotensegrity Archive website, freely downloadable, and you're free to pass it around as well.
Okay, I will look for the link while you give the rest of your presentation. But first, do you want me to read the stuff from BFS?
Yes, please do.
Okay, so the British Fascist Symposium, I hope that's the correct, I just have BFS here, is moving online. So tickets are available until midnight, Friday the 8th. That's the UK time. And they have Graham Scarr, John Sharkey, and Carol Davis speaking, as well as keynotes, Robert Schleip, Gil Headley, also David Lasondak, who is sometimes here. I don't know if he's here today, is he? Certainly John and Graham and Carol are probably here. Elizabeth Larkham and Sue Hitzman are doing, I think, some, I'm not sure what they're doing, maybe practical stuff. Rachel, do you know? There's great speakers, movement classes, clinical application sessions, breakout rooms, and rooms where you can meet up with friends and colleagues to connect online. It's 5 days, 1,200 to 2,100 daily with breaks, and all the content can be seen after the screening, so you can catch up.
Okay, 1,200 to 2,100 daily.
I think that means noon until
That's
is
not the
2,100?
price, folks.
Oh my gosh, yeah. No, I don't know what the price is, but and I think Jan is watching on YouTube. Jan, can you put a link into the YouTube chat and maybe also email it to me, and
Yeah,
I will
what
put it up
time
on the
zone are we
website.
talking about?
Say again,
Pardon?
Steve?
What time zone is it? 1,200 to 2,100?
It's in the UK.
UK time zone.
Yeah, and I'm pretty sure
Greenwich.
Wilbur is going to be presenting.
Wilbur, are you? I see you. Are you presenting? Yeah, he gave us a nod.
Yeah,
Who
'cause
else
I
out there
tweeted
is
that out.
presenting?
Yeah.
So that'll be great. Susan, do you want to go ahead and do your next little?
I am going to do that. Yeah.
Okay.
Let me find my file. So what I'm going to do is just a really short intro to Graham's presentation. You know what happens when I click play, I'm out of Zoom and I can't screen share. So first I have to share my screen. Momentito, por favor. Okay. So here it is, guaranteed short and sweet. Kinetics versus kinematics. So Arthur Steinler was an orthopedic surgeon. We're just going to give you a little history. It will clear some things up. He was at the University of Iowa, I believe, and in the 50s, he wrote this book that I have the name of somewhere. And I'll put some of this in the notes that we follow up with. But what I want you to take note of is that this is where I lose my cursor and I can't move things. That's okay. He used the term kinetic. He was inspired by the closed kinematic chain mechanisms, linkage mechanisms that were being used in mechanical engineering. And he wanted to take that into the body. He wanted to apply that concept. Engineers use the term kinematic. It has to do with motion. Okay. So this is from the National Strength and Conditioning Association website. And I think they've done a good job of putting it across. Although Steinler used the term kinetic, engineers use the term kinematic, which are two different things, but they appear to be talking about the same thing. Kinetic chain is not used in engineering or robotics. Kinematic chain is what's used in those fields. And kinetic chain came into exercise science. And even today, you can go to a lot of professional websites and they use kinematic chain and kinetic chain interchangeably. Okay, so we want to we want to clarify to help you with the confusion there. Okay, kinetics, kinetic energy has to do with the energy that an object has when it's moving. When you throw a football, that thing's flying across the room. That is motion. That is kinetic energy. Kinematics is the geometry of motion. Okay, according to Cornell University School of Engineering, it has to do with movement possibilities in terms of the geometry. So to conclude, kinetic chains, that's a concept used in exercise science. Kinematic chains are linkages that are studied in the field of kinematics. So we're talking about physics, a subdivision of mechanics and mechanical engineering having to do with the geometry of motion. So this little interesting break has been brought to you by me. And look at that fabulous image I'll show you again by Daniel J. Cohen from the Cohen Lab in Princeton. And tell me where the levers are. Who sees levers? Raise your hand. All right. I think I've set you up, Graham. Are you ready to go? All right. I'm going to stop my share.
Thanks, Susan. That was really helpful.
These little things make a difference.
Yeah.
Right. No, isn't it? There we go. Right. Thank you, Susan. And I want to talk about kinematics chains and some of the amazing things that living biology can do with them. And the first example I want to show you is that of the fish with these two kinematic chains, these 4-bar structures that are models of what's going on in the fish's jaws. It's all about control and amplification of force, speed, and kinetic energy. So the fish is happily swimming along. It opens its mouth, sucks in the prey, and closes again within a period of just 25 milliseconds. That's 25 thousandths of a second. And the mantis shrimp that walks along the seafloor with its raptorial appendage, and it strikes the prey with a force of 1,000 newtons within just 3 milliseconds. That's 3 thousandths of a second, because these closed chain systems can operate much faster than muscles can contract. And we're probably all familiar with the pantograph drawing mechanism that shows how we can enlarge the picture from a small drawing to a large one. And the same principle applies to the amplification of force, speed, and kinetic energy. Now, closed kinematic chains are widespread in engineering, ubiquitous in biology, and form the basic mechanics of the Biotensegrity model, where multiple parts are coupled into continuous mechanical loops. I'll show you the enlarger picture later. Coupled into multiple continuous mechanical loops, where each one guides and regulates the position and motion of all the others within the system. And the simplest shape that enables a structure itself to control motion is what is called the 4-bar mechanism, this picture on the left-hand side. We can also have 3-bar shapes like triangles that provide stability, or shapes with 5, 6, 7, any number of bars oriented in any direction. And these increase the number of motion possibilities. And at first sight, they might look just like complex lever systems, but this is misleading in a biological context, where each bar, each joint is made from smaller structures, which are made from smaller structures still. And they're all integrated together into complete structural and functional unit. So if we take the Tensegrity icosahedron model on the right-hand side, notice the 3-bar triangles, the white 3-bar triangles that provide the stability that allows the blue dotted 4 bars to change shape in a controlled way. And the same principle applies to all tensegrity structures, and that's the basis of human movement. When we look at humans in the knee, the cruciate ligaments form this conversely cross 4-bar that guides motion of the femur and tibia in relation to each other. And I know the anatomy is actually much more complicated than this. What this picture is a snapshot, illustration of the point we're trying to make. At the microscopic level, within the fascia, these wonderful pictures and videos produced by the surgeon Jean-Claude Gambito in human living fascia during surgery, where he tensions the tissue very slightly to reveal this wonderful fibrillar network. It's all interconnected, looks apparently random, but there inside are these closed kinematic chain systems that change shape constantly. And in all the tubes within the body, such as blood vessels and muscles, and like in the picture on the right-hand side, where the collagen fibers in the tube wall form this crossed helical arrangement, left and right-handed helixes, that strengthen the wall, but also allowed it to bend without buckling, so fluids can still flow through it. And these 4-bar shapes here are exactly what you see in a microscope. Within the limbs, multi-articular muscles that cross both the hip and knee joint and knee and ankle joint form these 4-bar arrangements that act as flexor and extensor muscles that guide and control motion of the limb. And once again, I must say, this is a huge simplification, it just illustrates the point. And these multi-articular muscles are particularly interesting because they can act over the full range of both joints at the same time, or restrict the motion of one whilst enhancing that of another. And multi-articular muscles, their isometric contraction, enables the system to transfer forces and power down through the system and enable movement that would otherwise be impossible. For example, if we try to jump from a standing position, we can't go very high. But if we crouch down and then jump, we can use the muscles that cross both the hip joint and knee joint to transfer their power down through these closed chain systems to the ankle and foot and enable a much greater range of motion. Now, closed kinematic chains have been described in biology since at least the 18th century by the British anatomist Winslow, who looked at the fingers. And this is a picture of the middle finger showing the key tensional pathways in the fascia that extends the tendon network. And you can see the pink 4-bar mechanism that Winslow referred to as a rhombus in a throwaway remark, but it's there. Now, there are simply not enough muscles to control all different finger positions on their own. And all the extensor muscles are contained within the forearm and hand. But rather than the muscles pulling on the bones and causing movement, the way we've all been taught, what happens is these 3 different muscles generate force that passes along the tendons. It's the soft tissues themselves that process that information of force and direction from the muscles and perform their own logic computations that then switch the system between different functional states. The soft tissues change their balance and guide the position of the bones in relation to each other and act in synergy with the nervous system. And the same applies throughout the body. Right, I won't get too technical with this, but if we look at the picture on the left, it shows a typical 4-bar mechanism. And if we plot the angles alpha and beta as it changes shape, plot them on a graph, we produce this nice blue non-linear curve. There we go, which is characteristic of this particular shape. Non-linearity is a physical property that emerges out of this closed chain organization. And if we think of the body as consisting of hundreds of millions of billions of these closed chain systems, all different sizes, different shapes, all interconnected together, interacting with each other in complex ways. One of the points I want to make is that it displays what is called many-to-one mapping. So many different shapes can produce the same mechanical function, which means that during embryological development, one structure can change shape or length through mutation or growth, still keep its functional mechanics. Because it's connected with all the others around it, the whole system can evolve as a unit, constantly changing, very dynamic. So the body emerges from within itself at each moment in time. That's as much as I want to say on that bit. We go to look at engineers. Now, engineers consider the stress-strain ratio to be a straight line, a linear one, whereas living tissues and tensegrities produce a non-linear curve, like this red curve shown here. Regardless of this, biomechanics pretend that living tissues operate within the more vertical part of the curve, purely because it simplifies their calculations, the high stress strain region. But it is much more likely that living tissues will operate within the more horizontal part of the curve, where they would consume less energy, be more responsive, and operating in a more energy efficient way. Another property that emerges out of this is that of auxetic behavior. Now, up until 30 years ago, what is auxetic behavior was considered virtually impossible. Most man-made structures, when they're stretched or lengthened like an elastic band, they get thinner in the middle. And when they're shortened, they get fatter in the middle. But living tissues and tensegrities can do the opposite, display auxetic behavior. So when they're lengthened in one direction, the whole structure expands in every direction. And when they're shortened in one direction, the whole structure contracts and increases density. The model I've shown here isn't a tensegrity, but it's still got the closed kinematic chain system to illustrate the point. Auxetic behavior has been described in bones, tendons, the skin, all the larger viscera. So biology is not constrained by the rules of mechanical engineering, but follows the more newly emerging physics of what is called soft matter. But that's for another. Here we are. I'll show you this model and I'll show it live in a moment when we finish this, where the structure expands in one direction, expands in every direction. So that's it. Short one on closed kinematic chains. Back to you, Susan.
Thanks, Graham. While you stop your share, can you show everybody your model up
Yeah.
close once the share is gone so we can see it?
Right. Closed kinematic chains, typical 4-bar mechanism. The whole thing is continuous mechanical loop. And now we take this one here, which is actually called a Janssen mechanism after Theo Janssen with his strand-beast creatures, showing how the 3-bar shapes allow the 4 bars to change shape in a controlled way. And finally, this one here, which is lots of actually 6-bar kinematic chains. We move 2 of them in relation to each other. The whole system expands and contracts, displays auxetic behavior in this 2-dimensional plane. And all those examples are just 2-dimensional. The auxetic one, there we go. And the tensegrity one, which is this one. Not a lot of movement, but the entire structure expanding and contracting in a controlled way, completely stable. So there we are. Off to you, Susan.
All right. Thanks. Thanks so much, Graham. What a treat. All right. I will once again attempt to share my screen. Share. Oh, yeah. So, the scintillating math of superstability, right? Closed kinematic chains in action. That's what we have here. You've all seen my Halloween costume and you heard about the reactions that I had when I wore it. So like I say, we're talking about math, but it's not typical math. It's not the math you might be used to. March 2018, the Wyss Institute at Harvard University described the architecture of life and stated that it had been described by computer modeling, stating that their new multi-scale modeling approach reaffirmed that tensegrity is a fundamental determinant of living systems at all size scales. How is the screen looking? Can you all see it?
Yeah, it looks good, Susan.
Okay, great, thanks. I just wanted to check before I got too far down the line. So from my perspective, with this, it's just a whole new ball game, because this means that, well, this is supporting scientifically the theory of tensegrity in biology, biotensegrity. So what is tensegrity? There's Leonid and Steve at the Needle Tower. Okay, tensegrity can be seen as a win-win collaboration between tension and compression. We use it and apply it to biology as an energy state model. It shows us the possibilities in life of a dynamic equilibrium, a co-arising duality. Daniel Claude Martin said, tensegrity maximizes the advantages of tension and minimizes the drawbacks of compression. What are the mathematics associated with tensegrity? And look at this fabulous, this is a physical sculpture by Gerald de Jong. He's really brilliant. With these new frontiers, we have been looking at the work of a lot of names you've maybe heard before, like Albert Harris, Joe Clinton, and then some new names that might be new to you before today: Robert Connolly, Eric Demain, Ben Roth, Alan Back, Placide Ferreira, and I'm sure I'm mucking up that one. My guess is that it maybe is Portuguese. What do you think, Mariana, rather than Spanish? Yes, she says yes. So my Spanish is not the worst in the world. My Portuguese is non-existent. But anyway, he's got some great stuff. These new frontiers reveal the mathematics of tensegrity are associated with concepts you've been hearing about today: superstability, kinematic indeterminacy, infinitesimal rigidity. I just love the sound of that one. Inherent error canceling abilities. We're not going to have the privilege today of having the time to go into all these things, but you've heard of a lot of them. Of course, closed kinematic chains, as Leonid has described, a broader definition of joints, a broader definition of what we think of as struts and cables. And why do we care? And again, as Leonid has described earlier, and as Graham has described in his recent writing, the mathematics is different from what is traditionally used in biomechanics and the modeling of living things. It presents a new range of possibilities for explaining how tensegrity relates to biology. And with this, to my mind, lots of the unprovable body work effectiveness of body work and movement therapy approaches, like the light touch, non-local events, how a little acupuncture needle spinning in the ear can help your knee or your kidney. It becomes supported by advanced mathematical theory. So I think that's really kind of nice. Now I've got my script here on my iPad, so let me catch up with myself. The math, the traditional math associated with biomechanics, just to give you that overview and revisit it one more time, has to do with calculating static linear analysis. It's fraught with assumptions. This is the math that you it's probably the math you think you hate. Okay, traditional biomechanics, well, we're only human, as I said before. We want to be able to nail things down. We want to know exactly what's going on with those internal dynamics and mechanics. We want everything to stay still so we can analyze it, even though that we know that living things are never still in any place at any time. So it's looking at the body as a machine is a very useful way to do that, to get those answers we crave, but it's pinning the butterfly. And so traditional biomechanics is kind of a product of our craving for static determinacy and our answering our craving and our need to want to measure things, even as I said earlier, stuff that's not measurable. So Tensegrity has a different kind of math. And I'm going to be showing you a few of these amazing linkage pieces from Keishiro Ueki at Ryukoku University in Japan. He's just got some beautiful work. Here are some closed kinematic chains. Look at that beautiful thing.
He was on YouTube earlier, Susan. He may still be with us.
Okay, great. Well, if you're there, thank you so much, Keishiro. We appreciate your work. Keep at it. And actually, I think he's a freshman. And I think he should immediately be bumped up to faculty level. Can we help him do that? Okay, so here's another look at some of the kinds of math we are looking at. So this is from a great video that you can find on YouTube and see the whole thing. I'm just going to play a little piece.
The motion that we are watching unfolds an octahedron to a cuboctahedron, keeping pyrotahedral symmetry. It was popularized by Buckminster Fuller as the jitterbug. In the middle, there is one additional stage with extra symmetry, an icosahedron. Highlighting the 6 extra edges of the icosahedron, we can let them follow along in the jitterbug. They become face diagonals of the cuboctahedron and then internal diagonals of the next icosahedron. This configuration can be built as a rigid tensegrity framework with struts along the green diagonals and springs or cables along the red triangle edges.
So some of you may have noticed that at one point they talk about the cuboctahedron when it's actually in the shape of an icosahedron. Look for it if you watch it again on YouTube, but it's a really great video. But what I like about the fact that they made that mistake and sort of left it there, this is the International Mathematical Union getting it wrong, folks. At least in the timing of where they talk about a cuboctahedron and an icosahedron. So if you're worried about making errors and not getting things right, relax. We're all making errors and we're all making errors all the time. And we rely on each other to, well, we all help each other out when we have our blind spots. So we're focusing on the closed kinematic chain piece. Graham showed you some of his. As you can see, mine are, no surprise, a good deal scrappier than Graham's. But I highly recommend that you make your own. So those are cut up straws with string through them, toothpicks and marshmallows, pieces of old cardboard with little brass fasteners, and then move these things with your own hands and feel the movement, okay? As Graham showed you, in his presentation, but here's a working one from our friend Kishiro again. A pantograph is a closed kinematic chain system that allows you to draw a small image in order to create a large one. Oh, look, a typo. See, we all make mistakes. And allows you to draw a larger image to create a small one. And imagine you were sitting there watching one of these images being drawn, and that's all you could see. You wouldn't be able to tell whether you were seeing the larger one or the smaller one being drawn, unless you could see the overview of the entire pantograph. So remember, perspective is important here. Now, what do we want to be able to do? We want to be able to understand the movement of living things. This is from Tay Aziz. I believe she's in the UK, and she took a time-lapse photography kind of session with her Monstera plant while she was shut in and posted it on Twitter. And I just think it's fabulous. And look at how the plant moves left to right. And you can see that there's movement in the new leaf that's coming up behind as well. We want to be able to understand this sort of thing. And we think, those of us in the field that are presenting today, we believe that closed kinematic chains can help us do that. Here's another linkage from Kishiro, and you can see that something that starts little can get big, it can spin, it can turn. Watch the dot at the bottom right, right now, that's kind of the center of the action. But just look at that linkage and that unfolding. Now, this one, I have to apologize in advance to the vegetarians because we don't usually get violent, but there's going to be a little, just steel yourself, my friends. This lovely, cute little hermit crab is not going to, well, you'll see. Anyway, there are other behaviors that we want to be able to understand, and we feel that closed kinematic chains can help us with this as well.
The mantis unloads the ace up his sleeve. Hammer claws. His spring-loaded clubs strike 50 times faster than we can blink. For a moment, the surrounding water reaches the temperature of the surface of the sun. You heard that right. This crab is toast.
So sorry about that. But that power and speed, what appears to be a spring-loaded system, there are no springs in there in terms of a mechanical spring as we know it. But we think there's something else, closed kinematic chains. And you may have noticed that National Geographic did a little slow-mo action there, perhaps a little photo enhancement with the surface of the sun stuff, but you get the idea. So let's go back to Keishiro's work, and here's amplification of force and speed. I mean, I'm imagining force through the speed. But look at that whip action. And as Graham said, it's the structure itself that's guiding and regulating the motion. So it's precise, it's controlled. Really lovely stuff. Thank you again, Kishiro. Okay, now we're going to look at our friend the octopus.
The octopus. Imagine that you're an octopus, like this cyanea here. Your body has no bones, none. And what that means is that you'd be able to go almost anywhere you want to. Even if you happen to be a very large octopus, 600-pounder, say, you'd be able to squeeze yourself down so far, you could pass through a passageway no larger than a quarter. Since you don't have air bladders or gas pockets that would crush or implode at great depths, you can live at the very, very bottom of the ocean, where there's 15,000 pounds of pressure per square inch. A human being exposed to that kind of pressure would implode in a split second.
Okay, and just for those of you who aren't in the US, I'd say a quarter is about that big, a bit bigger than my thumbnail, just so you understand that relative size. But what we're seeing in the octopus is this endless ability to reconfigure while it's maintaining, we have to assume from what we know of biology, right? While it's maintaining its energy efficiency and without compromising its safety or any of its kind of higher level systemic stability or integrity. So this, to me, is what we're looking at with superstability. And again, some of the work of Kishiro. And these are, as Graham reminded us, these are planar examples of the possibilities that are inherent in the geometry. This is going from condensed to expanded. And so that octopus has to squeeze down and get through that tube and then gets out into the other tank and is back to her regular shape. So now, as Graham and Leonid and Steve have all told you, we wonder when we see certain movement, is it chaotic or is it highly ordered? And I'm having a little computer burp. Here we go. There we go. So check out this movement. Does it seem chaotic? We're going to zoom out and watch it a little more. Is it random? Does it have purpose? Okay. Can I get it to move? Uh-oh, I've clicked twice. It's going to go on to the next slide, I bet, when it wakes up. Let's find out. If it does, I'll get back to it later. I apologize.
Well, we're waiting for
Oh,
that.
yawn
Well,
and
we're
stretch.
Well,
Yes,
we're
Chris.
waiting for that, Susan. I've put a link in the chat. We'll add some of these resources to the next Biotensegrity Archive newsletter.
Yes.
So you can find the link to subscribe to that there. And Susan is really great at giving us all of the links so that we can add that.
Okay, we'll have to jump. I don't know how to make Keynote go back a slide. So we'll just jump to the next one.
You
and
can click
say-
on the left arrow on your keyboard if you want.
And it will go back a slide?
Yep.
Ooh. Chris, you just gave me some tech help. Thank
That's a
you.
first.
Yeah, I love it. You see, we all have our gaps. Okay, so there it is. It was not chaotic movement. It appeared to be random. It appeared to be crazy, perhaps to some of you, to me anyway. But here is this very regular symmetrical shape. And so what appears as chaotic movement can actually be the result of a highly organized and efficient, energy efficient structure, and could actually be part of an organism optimizing itself to a specific task. This is from Matt Tiska at Vanderbilt. And I'm just going to say it again. What appears as chaotic movement. We know from studying evolution, biological efficiency, it can actually be the result of a highly organized, energy efficient structure and could be part of an organism optimizing itself to a task. Isn't that gorgeous? Thank you, Matt. Okay, back to Keishiro. This is what he calls Wittgenstein's rod. Those of you who want to dive deeper into that can look that one up. It's fun stuff. You're seeing two images being created. They're identical. This is Leonid's black box, right? The given output gives us absolutely no clue as to what is going on, what the internal workings are that are creating these outputs. We cannot determine the kinematics. This is kinematic indeterminacy. There's what my friend Joanne used to call the spinning wheel of doom. It gives you a chance to breathe, yawn, stretch. So that kinematic indeterminacy, I believe, relates to that many-to-one mapping that Graham was talking about. And I think if you look, I haven't found exactly how to articulate it, but the concepts of degeneracy and redundancy that we look at in the body's systems. And so we're seeing two possible kinematic linkages that would create these shapes. But there could be hundreds, thousands. I mean, I would think a theoretically unlimited number of possible kinematic linkages that could create the same output. So when somebody moves an arm up in the air, turns their head, what's going on inside? You don't know. Okay, my conclusions. Closed kinematic chains, CKCs, are emergent phenomena within biology's tensed framework organisms, and as Steve has written from the very beginning, viruses to vertebrates. Apparent chaos may actually be a result of a system's superstability within its dynamic homeostasis. Leonid's black box, kinematic indeterminacy, tells us that we cannot know all the workings behind a given movement outcome. In the body, there may be an incalculable number of endlessly transmutable and continuously reconfiguring kinematically indeterminate CKC systems operating at multiple scale levels simultaneously. The mathematics of superstability and kinematic indeterminacy tell us that once you get inside the body, the mathematical formulas traditionally used in biomechanics for calculating the body's internal forces do not apply. So I'll post these thanks and references. We'll find a way to get you all of those. A couple more treats from Keishiro before I pass it over to Leonid. And really look at these things. The one on the lower right looks exactly like what Graham was showing us, right? That 5 bar that expands and condenses symmetrically. It looks a lot like that. And Rachel wanted fireworks. So here they are. This is from Daniel J. Cohen, the Cohen Lab at Princeton. Time-lapse microscopy changed biology for me and made me change fields. To wit, our spinning tissue mandala of kidney tissue dancing for 2 days. The red being the early cell cycle, the green, the later cell cycle, and the blue, the outlines. Is that not fireworks? Is that not gorgeous? And again, find me the levers. I don't see them. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Leonid.
Thank you, Susan. You know, that was brilliant. You know, this, especially the pre-final phrase of yours, right? So you see that eternally transmutable, incalculable, and so on. That was a powerful one, right? Okay, so well, I guess we are close to 2 hours of this whole thing, and I would try to get maybe quick and then just to, well, quick upon my standards, just to try to give you some basic ideas on what we are busy with and why we're so excited about the whole thing. Okay, yes, visibility.
It's good, Leonid.
Oh, okay. So I was like, okay, so yeah, I was a bit scared. So first point that I really want to make, like I wanted to get 3 relatively quick points, right? So point number 1, why we are so excited about the mathematical tensegrity. Well, of course, one thing is the superstability, and we won't be even like able to cover all the implications of the superstability. But the key point, we are moving we are moving 2 floors up, meaning that what do we find in the works of Connolly, Black, and all these other pure mathematicians? They provide the solution in general. What does it mean? What has been our greatest trouble with the tensegrity when we present it to any people with anatomical background, biomechanical background, practitioners, and so on? But even for yourself, what is the key problem? Is the standard attribution of struts and cables. It's like, oh, these are the struts. Oh, maybe these are the bones. Oh, these are the cables. Oh, these are kind of muscles. And this thing, it's like clicks all the time. But the solution there is larger. What do we see? So these greenish things taken from the article of Connolly, these are not real. These are virtual, means that they have found the solution not for particular engineering part of struts and cables. They have found a solution for this as edges and vertices. Means that what you see here is the most general definition of strut. Just, you see, what is the beauty of mathematics? Beauty of mathematics is to be able to formulate the least number of assumptions. So what are just the 2 assumptions that we are using here for tensegrity? It's just a very basic inequality. The moment you have cables, namely the relationships that pull the elements together, pull the vertices of a polygon together, and we have struts which push those 2 apart, just these 2 properties. We don't say anything about what material they are made of, what kind of forces are there, what kind of thickness, what kind of length. None of that. None of those restrictions. But even at that most general level, we get that tensegrity, we get the formulation of the superstability by means of pre-stress. The structure is going to be super stable. That's the beauty. That's the beauty and that's the importance. That's the one that highlights, that makes it so universally applicable. So meaning we developed from being fixed and fused and, oh, well, because, like 2 tea parties ago or 3 tea parties ago, one Jean-Claude was there, right? There were the standard conversations, standard questions. Well, I see the struts and cables, but how would it would account for irregular shapes? How would it allow for the continuously changing lengths? And then the current trend. Well, how about the liquids? See, all these are material questions. Tensegrity provides you the immaterial answer, the principle, how all these material things can be held together if they respect these properties. So that's really the biggest thing why we are so excited, because in that respect, you see, what I was trying to also to point out, for example, like this combinatorial geometry. Lately, they got their interest in origami. What is origami? Origami seems like toys, right? But what is the specifics of mathematics? For instance, when they define the origami, what is the difference? On origami, you can see really well the difference between high level mathematical solution and lower level engineering solution. To describe the patterns of how and the rules of doing the origami, you need to define the paper. Well, when we are engineers or when we are regular people, what do? We take the piece of paper, hold it in one hand, and say, hey, this is the paper. And then you connect to the brain and say, Mr. Brain, now tell me what kind of rules I can apply to this paper to fold it in different ways. So we have real paper and virtual brain.
Hey, Leonid.
Yes.
Leonid, if you're actually folding paper right now, because we have your presentation on the screen, we can't see it. It sounds like you've got a piece of paper there. Yeah.
That's right. But wait, but you are folding paper in my hand. You can't see me.
No. Well.
You'll need to stop your screen share, Leonid.
I see. Okay. Yes, I was just folding the paper, right? I was just folding the paper and saying that, in that sense, we see it as two hands, right? So this hand, I'm folding the physical piece of paper, and with this brain, I'm trying to think what kind of algorithms I'm going to apply to it. So in that sense, the virtual and the physical are different, right? And if I were an engineer, I would have, there are all classes of paper. It could be, instead of the paper, which could be whatever foil, it could be bronze foil, whatever, silver foil, any other kind of foil, or it could be just plastic sheet and so on. It could be all sorts of things. What would the mathematician do in this sense? They would define what are the most essential properties of papers, of all class of this particular surfaces. And that's how they will work with it. So it will be connected as the most general rules of paper folding. The same thing, Tensegrity. Why we're so happy now? Because we can overcome those limitations of material part. That's really the number one happy part. So the second part that I wanted to get here is this. Let me scroll through.
So you're going to share your screen again, please, Leonid?
Yes, I will share my screen again. I now remember.
Thank you.
That
And
I need to do
while
this.
that's happening, I'm
Thank
just
you.
going to jump in and say,
Okay.
Hold on, Leonid, sorry. We're learning that when these video clips of movement, like some of the ones I show, are getting over to YouTube, they end up being very choppy. So if you're watching from YouTube, we apologize. We'll try to get you the links and a way to see these things later on. And thanks for letting us know. Over to you, Leonid.
Yeah, over to me, but where is my Zoom? Okay. Share screen again, right? share. All right. Discuss is this joints and members. You can see that this is really a tricky part about terminology. So what happens in anatomy? In anatomy, we have joints and bones, right? So, and when all these drawings that people are doing, you know, biomechanics, basically what do? They convert joints and bones into joints and members. See, there is no such word as bone in structural analysis, but there is a word joint, but it has a different meaning. That's the important thing. And that's what I'm going to explain, that, you know, over there are other
Leonid, we're losing you quite a lot. Have you got other programs filling your system? We're missing everything you're saying.
Yes. Leonid, are you still with us? No, he's off. So, okay. So we're monitoring to see if we can get Leonid back. He may not even realize he's been disconnected, right? Leonid's coming to us from Spain. Oh, there you are.
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay.
Okay.
Yes.
Is it?
Now
it is.
I guess there was some disconnects. Where wasn't it?
We've missed the last couple of minutes or so, Leonid.
Okay, yes. Yeah. So, and then you have all this stuff, which are the construction joints and carpentry joints. So you've got all sorts of these things. So they are also connections. And my point is that when we move to the analysis, there are all sorts of classes of the machinery joints. So the thing that we need to understand is this, is that when we are making this move, when we're trying to understand what's happening, we have to really respect what we are dealing with. If we are dealing with structural analysis, that means that we have to use all of those elements. We have to find what elements would correspond in the body to the construction joints, to the carpentry joints, to the, you know, to the all kinds of classes in the machinery joints. So it's a lot more variable than just this kind of situation. And that's really the important thing, to move from anatomical topography to include the muscles that we consider the anatomical movers, right? So you see what biomechanics does today with those biomechanical arts. So we know that there are what, like, if you look at the anatomical textbook, there would be over 200 joints. But if you look at the kinesiology textbook, how many joints are you going to find there? You're going to find an elbow, you're going to find the wrist, you know, maybe. So maybe if you can find 20, that's good. What happened to the other 200? They are not so conveniently calculable, so they're out. Am I still on?
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. So then we have the construction joints. Out of the construction joints, we have almost nothing, you know, like just minimal connections out of the whole classes of the machinery joints. So the fact is that what we end up with even out of the total structural analysis, biomechanics uses a very, very, very narrow spot. And my point really is very simple, is that if we want to get better understanding about the body, we have to move from this language of the, we really have to understand and make sure that we know what we're talking about. And what is the key point overall? That what is the key point for indeterminacy? That anytime there is a change of material properties, anytime there is a change in the cross section, anytime there is a change in slope, anytime there is any change in the stress strain ratio, well, we've got ourselves a displacement, so there is a joint emerging. So, guys, you can still see me? Yes, okay. So, look, this is a standard picture that I've just pulled off the internet. Describe it when we have a muscle contraction. Cross section. The answer is,
No.
and if the muscle
Wait.
changes its cross section,
Mhm.
then it becomes a joint. The ligament, the tendon, it's a joint. It can change tension, it can change cross section, it responds to temperature. It's a joint. So when we discuss this whole point of the kinematic indeterminacy, then even the things that we perceive being so simple, they are being treated as simple only because of this restrictive convention that somebody didn't articulate all the small prints. Biomechanics gave you the large print. The anatomical joint is a structural joint. The bone is a member. But the biomechanics didn't share with you the small print. And the small print is that anything that changes cross section, anything that changes length, anything that changes response to temperature, anything, all these elements are joints. I know it's hard to digest, but that's exactly the point. This is exactly the reason why we, in fact, need the whole tensegrity perspective. Because otherwise, we are, stuck with very little. Because the only reason why people keep themselves happy with biomechanics is because, it's the small print is not being shared. I'll go as far as to say, when tourism was open and you go to the whatever churches in Spain or in Italy, what do they tell you, right? Say, by the way, all these paintings in these churches, they are coming from the days when the service was in Latin and people were illiterate. So the paintings in the church were to show them the scenes, kind of that they would be able to follow some kind of, it's a comic strip, basically just to illustrate what the priest was reading because they couldn't understand the word from what he was saying. So if we look at the relationship between the body workers and the physical therapists and generally healthcare profession and the biomechanists, it's about the same. Biomechanists, they have these holy scriptures and well, the Holy Scriptures are written in Latin and nobody reads the small print. So my final piece here would be very practical. I'm going to do this very simple explanation just for you to understand that it all actually makes a very direct practical, has a very direct practical meaning. Share the screen. Okay, I'm going to take this picture. So this picture is the regular X-ray. And since I am in the field of working with the CP children, right? So one of the central questions for children with cerebral palsy is the question about the hip. So, but this question comes in two colors. You know, if we now look at the picture of the child with cerebral palsy, this is a more or less standard picture of this X-ray, right? So that's the healthy X-ray. This is the CP X-ray. If you were like any regular orthopedic practitioner, what would you say? You would look at it and say, okay, what's happening here? There is a missing over the head of the femur, so we need to force it into somehow and create this roof. And you would also say, well, because this child didn't have the loads coming from the top, that's why the angle between the shaft and the neck remained vertical as in the baby. Because if we look at the babies, we're going to see this, right? So you see, this is, you know, in a baby, it's relatively straight. So the central question, very practical question, like for many people, it's dramatically important question. What is it? Is this a roof that goes through, right? Because the standard logic there is that how is the head, how is the acetabulum formed? It is formed in their standard compression model as a Washington monument. The person stands up, the pelvis, the weight of the pelvis presses over this level, and the bone bends, right? The actual angle of the femur appears, and then you got the roof that covers the head of the femur. So that's a standard compression-based story. And this standard compression-based story implies a very clear therapeutic logic. So this child would be put into the standing frame. What is the idea behind the standing frame? If the child cannot stand, you force him. So the idea of the weight from the top is going to translate into some formation, and that is going to be beneficial for the leg. But if we now remove this assumption and look at this picture with the like undisturbed eye, what we are going to see? Instead of the whole situation, we are going to first look at the hip joint picture. And then we are going to look at it and say, by the way, but what we are seeing here, what are the tensional elements which are attached there? These tensional elements are their joint capsule and all these ligaments, which are the iliofemorals, pubofemorals, and all that stuff. And then the logic is, but these guys, when they work tensionally, they create a pull on their attachment. So then this could be a formation of a lip. Is it a lip or is it a roof? What is going to help us with answering this question? Well, we are going to look further. We get back to this picture and say, can we get some answers from this one? And now look at this. This is the one, the shell with the CP. We all know. What is this? This is supposed to be the greater trochanter, right? And this is the lesser trochanter. But you look at these children and what do you see? It's a giant lesser trochanter and there is a missing greater trochanter. And I can show you hundreds of these x-rays. They're all more or less the same. They're different in terms of the displacements, but the giant lesser trochanters and the tiny greater trochanters, that's what happens all the time. And once again, let's look at the healthy child. What do you see here? You can see this is small, lesser trochanter and large, greater trochanter. And now, why is that happened? Why does that happen? Or why is this happening? See, if we look at now the things closely. So this is the famous iliopsoas. But what happens to the children with CP? In their scenario, if you look at this whole thing closer, what you're going to see? The iliopsoas is attached at the lesser trochanter. Then it has a conjoined tendon between the iliacus and the psoas. But in the CP children, the iliacus is almost not present. It's all absent. So what do they have? They have this triangle of the direct connection that goes from the lesser trochanter to the lumbar spine. And on any practical purposes, these are the people who don't have, from the connection standpoint, effectively they are hipless because there is no tensional activation of the hip joint, and they are pelvicless because there is no tensional activation of the pelvis. And then what else do we know about the attachments to the lesser trochanter? That's their so-called adductor. It's attached to the pubic and it's attached there. So what do we see? We suddenly see a super stable configuration here. We see a self-stabilizing tensional system that has no compression members in terms of their, bones inserted into it. It only has the attachments, and it's actually the muscle itself that works with all kinds of tone regulation. And if the muscle is being so active, then what do we have? Then we create the situation where this activity or super activity of these muscles translates into super development of the lesser trochanters. Right? You've got the lesser trochanters, you've got these connections, so here you are. So this is a simple example. And why is it happening in cerebral palsy? Because the moment we have to look at the cerebral palsy not as a problem, but we have to look at cerebral palsy as the, the natural adjustment, as the desperate situation when the body shows its like most energy efficient ways of stabilizing. So And this is where we are arriving to very simple and practical things. How do we interpret the situation? Whether we interpret in a compression sense, we get one set of practical recommendations and actions. If we interpret in a tension and tensegrity sense, we would come up with a completely different set of the. Okay, I got
You okay?
underdeveloped versus, yeah, I've got a message there. Well, I mean, it was, of course,
There was a
the,
question, Leonid, from.
yeah, it was a figure of speech, right? So you
Okay.
see that, of course, it's there. Everything anatomically, everything is there. It's just doesn't participate in any loads, right? So there was a question in the chat about the underdeveloped rather than missing iliacus. So my point is very simple. What I'm actually trying to say is that depending on how we interpret the situation, all this conversation that we had today matters, because what kind of like theory and what kind of understanding, what kind of structural analysis we have directly impacts our understanding of the bodies and directly impacts our like interventions, applications, interpretations of what's good and what's bad, and so on and so forth. So that's really what we are talking about, right? So you see, I really wanted to kind of complete this conversation about the frontiers with this part, that it's about the very practical stuff. It's not about just sort of few kind of guys and girls get together and discussing some sort of highbrow things. So we are talking about very, very, very practical things. And again, you know, when we see those things in their most pronounced form, when it comes to the people with disabilities, well, or like developmental disabilities in particular, but then to lesser extent, this kind of situations, they are obviously present in all sorts of, well, in all of us, right? In all the regular people as well. So I guess that will be the completion of this message. We are already at the 2.5 hours. So, and some 40 people are still with us. So I think that that's pretty good retention rate. And I will pass it to Chris as the leader.
Oh, okay. I do have a comment here from Wilbur Kelsick, who I think meant to give it to everybody. He says, Leonid, this is the beauty of biological system, super ability to adaptation, infinite possibilities, which is what you've been talking about. Exactly.
That's right.
Yep. And we did agree to take some questions, and I don't know if anyone's been looking for questions on YouTube. Wilbur, there have been also some questions about gravity. Wilbur asks, is gravity only
That's my favorite one.
Is gravity only acting vertical downward? Do you consider it as a force field? And then there's a follow-up from Stepanka, or related, would you consider gravity as a type of electromagnetism, interdimensional? So if you could just talk a little about
okay, so my point is this, right? This is really essential to understand that the human body at the level of the skin has the border of the kinematic and static indeterminacy, meaning we don't know the force resolutions inside. So therefore, any of those drawings which are making the plumb lines going through, right? So you see, you can get the plumb line out and above, but you cannot make a plumb line go through, because you don't know what kind of turns and convolutions it takes inside. That's the key point, right? There is a difference between internal and external. So this is our central objection, that biomechanics passes through this border of indeterminacy as if it didn't exist. And that's the main problem with this black box versus the white box, right? On the practical level, the moment you even let it for a second, for a split second, to get the assumption that you can do the kinematic determinacy, then we have a problem, because that's, few days ago, your American president had a beautiful thing, right? So you see that, why not, get yourself to bleach exposure just for a split second, right? It's the same thing. It's the same thing. The moment you get a split exposure to the penetration through, that's it, you're done. So this is what we are talking about. We are talking about the fact of respecting the intrinsic kinematic and static indeterminacy, and then still trying to figure out some rules and some, regularities on how we can understand what's happening inside. But, that's what be the gray box.
Can I just, so we have a follow-up. I'm going to give you a follow-up with my Tensegrity, Lena, because I always go back to the model. And when the gravitational pull of this item, it's going to fall to the floor, but the material forces would need to pass through the material of the Tensegrity. The Tensegrity will fall straight down according to a plumb line, but the center of this thing is empty. So in terms of its material pathway, the forces going through the materials, they're going around in a spiral direction and all of that. Is that related to what you're talking about with the body?
Yeah, we can say so. If we kind of, articulate all the small print that this is just the, the model which has this particular manifestation, but that's the point. It's already what you have in your hands. It's already kinematically indeterminate.
Yeah, there we go.
So that's the key thing. Right. So you see, but what I really want to show here is that there are huge opportunities that we have, because then, like, pretty much there is a whole set of openings of the new linkages, connections, observations, and so on that could be seen. And what the examples of whatever the anatomy train lines or any other lines or any other things are just a small, just a small subset of possible things that we can think about.
Okay. And so also, Lena, Doug is requesting that you discuss your analogy between traditional anatomy and archaic maps, maybe Mercator projection maps.
Oh, okay. So okay, but that's a bit more complex there. But okay, but what I was referring in the previous conversations, right, is that we have the Earth as a objective, like three-dimensional object, right? And then what happens is that we have to understand that at different times there are different mappings. So Mercator map has its own way of representing, and it has its own benefits, But if you look at the Mercator map, you have huge Greenland, you have huge Finland, you have tiny India, and tiny Spain. So, and if you don't read the small print and take the Mercator map for granted, then for example, if I try to decide to, well, I mean, nobody's flying now, but okay, if I were to fly, right, so you see, from Spain to to Washington, right, then I would fly the plane would go according to the great arc. And then the person who would be looking at the flat map would say, hey, Mr. Pilot, you're fooling me. you know, why you are flying away from Washington. You know, I have just drawn the straight line, you know, I'm not going to pay for all the stupid extra miles that you want to make, or maybe it's a hijacker, right? So you see, because I wanted to go there and you're taking the wrong way. So this kind of mistakes and this kind of the incorrect interpretations are very plentiful. And that's the same thing, that the country itself is a flat thing, but then there is an airspace and there is a match between the airspace and the country, right? So you see there is another kind of displacements there. And then, you know, you can, you know, divide the countries by true areas and the projected areas. So it's like all these things we have to understand that anatomy in that respect is a very dynamic relationship. So that, you know, and in that respect, we get back to the, what is the starting flaw of current biomechanics? You know, the starting point that it makes the skinless person. You know, the skin doesn't participate in any of the biomechanics equations. That is in itself has to be a huge warning sign that what you are dealing with is a major trouble there.
Yeah. And Doug said something, you were talking about maps not accounting for airspace. A country ends at the border. The connective tissue of the water is not on the map. Does that make sense to you, Leonid?
Yeah, I mean, of course it makes sense. You know, it's my own analogy, but you know.
Yeah, no, I mean, you recall what he's talking about. Doug, maybe you should unmute yourself and speak for yourself.
Well,
Okay.
the whole business of kinesiotaping has to do with giving extra skin. Skin clearly has an effect because if kinesiotaping has an effect, skin has the same kind of effect. It's binding the area, so it's contributing to the whole functioning system.
And Ken's
Well,
okay.
in which sense we talk about the fact that the people from kinesiotaping, they actually would be should be the first enthusiasts for their, you know, the biotensegrity understanding.
Ken's okay says that it was part of his inspiration for his work. So he's one of the developers of that. Go ahead, Steve.
Yeah, well, I very quickly passed through that muscles are an internal force when I did my little presentation, and that's part of what is saying you really can't fully understand what's going on with a muscle because it's an internal force, not an external force, and it cannot do anything to external forces. I got a picture. Let me just go back to that one thing I showed, because I think I have it right there. I put it up. So muscles, if you're falling over, muscles can't hold you up. Once that body starts falling, you have to have an external force to do something about it. So you have to recognize that muscles can change the shape of your body, but they can't do anything against an external force. They have to take another external force, pass it through the body to do something. It's a very deep thought, but you have to spend some time to understand it.
Great. And Daniel Roy is asking, Daniel, I believe, is in Australia. Hi, Daniel. Good to see you. He says, if we can expand, move our bodies auxetically. Huh? Yeah, in the middle of the night, right? We're worth it.
It's tomorrow.
If that's right, it's so late, it's tomorrow. If we can expand, move our bodies auxetically, then would this increase the pre-stress within the system? Who wants to?
That's a great question.
Yeah. Steve, Leonid?
Yeah, I mean, I'll be happy because you see, look, this is exactly the point that that is being like emphasized now. So that what is the essence of the superstability? The essence of superstability is the capacity of the tensed framework to maintain stacked levels of pre-stress, which could be sourced as the self-stress. So that's really the whole point, that in fact the system has what could be seen as a big residual, right? So the big residual, the internal reservoir of those internal capacities, which is that internal press stress. And in that respect, yes, we have to deal with this part, because auxetic is the non-Poisson, non-deformable thing, because otherwise, whenever something changes its shape and so on, and any kind of Poisson ratio change in the cross section of the muscle itself, it makes a joint, right? So therefore, in that sense, those would be the post events, right? So you see, that would be kind of the post levels of pre-stress, and those levels of pre-stress would be stacking and so on. And in this new understanding, we can see that there would be thousands and thousands of the available of the sub configurations. So this is really like what we are, once we move to this pure math, right? So we remove all the style kind of like restrictive arguments. Is this a tensegrity or not? Is the spider web a tensegrity or not? We can see the whole set of classes which satisfy the superstability criteria in a sort of stronger or the less strong form. And the whole transition to the icosahedrons and so on, that would be like the stronger way of doing it. So
Let me answer that question directly.
Yes.
If you make an isometric contraction of your muscle, you can see it expands auxetically because it doesn't shorten and just gets bigger. So, and you've increased tension in the system. So yes, an auxetic expansion can increase the overall tension in the system.
yeah, the pre-stress, yes.
Now, Craig Nevin is watching on YouTube. So I'm going to read to you what he says, and somebody maybe try to do this. Point, okay, 2 thumbs up, point at the camera, move the index fingertips together, flip the right thumb down, slide the fingers over each other. The 6 finger bones prove we are 6-bar tensegrity. I'll let you play with that. Also, Stepanka, goodbye, Wilbur. Are you heading out? Is that what you're doing? Oh, no,
He has to be unmuted.
You have to unmute. But let me say, Stepanka asked, would you consider gravity as a type of electromagnetism interdimensional?
Okay, so let me put this thing, right? So
Yeah.
what I'm encouraging everybody to do, don't mix modalities, right? So the collateral modalities, the heat, the electromagnetism and so on, they exist. But if we try to use those for mechanical explanations, we're doing ourselves a disservice. It's it's the same thing as people when try to explain what happens out of the hands-on therapy via using some neurology. That's not a good explanation. I mean, these effects exist, but they are secondary. They are already happening within the system after its response to mechanical impacts. And our job is to understand the mechanical to mechanical first. And then once we had a better understanding of that, then we say, okay, now let's try to figure out what the collateral modalities of heat, electromagnetism, and whatever else, could be there.
Okay.
Yeah,
Go ahead, Wilbur. Go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
All right. Thank you so much, Leonard and Dr. Levin and Susan and Graham. Excellent information. Just wanted to just mention about the aesthetic properties of tissue. And I wrote the comment that aesthetic properties actually behavior protects the tissue to allow pretension to occur. And if you think about it simply, as Graham was explaining with the rubber band, you pull a rubber band, it gets thin in its center. But if you think of the Achilles tendon, if that tendon was allowed to get thinner as it lengthens in the pretension, it would constantly break. We would not be able to apply the forces that we do when we run or move, because especially if you look at high-speed running, the only way in the human, in terms of pretension in the Achilles, is in the movement we call dorsiflexion. And when you dorsiflex the tendon, the ankle, the tendon actually doesn't narrow. It actually widens. And that has to look at, is based on the biological properties we think of the tendon. There's the whole concept around hyaluronic acid and the bonding of water molecules, where the repulsion forces of the negative charges cannot come closer, they will not allow themselves to get close together because of the repulsion of the negative charges within the matrix, the glycosaminoglycan matrix. So the aesthetic properties in tissue is a natural phenomenon to allow pretension to occur. If we don't have that, we can't have pretension. And if you have a dehydrated tissue, even in a plant, if you load it, it's going to break. If you take a green plant, a stick, and you can bend it, because it doesn't go through that same concept. And it's a little bit more complicated, but you just have to look at it in that fashion. Most of the movement of pretension in the body, the tissue has to be aesthetic so that it can execute movement or take forces or whatever. It wouldn't work otherwise. And I mean, that's the beauty about the concepts about biotensegrity, why other mechanical explanation in terms of simple biomechanics doesn't explain biological behavior. So that's all I have to say. I have to run. This is interesting. I don't want to leave, but I have.
Oh, now you've brought some things up, Wilbur. I think Steve wants to say something.
I'm loving to say something.
Steve, you have to unmute. I think if something's alive, it has pre-stress.
Yeah, well, it's again, I look at muscles as being turnbuckles rather than as expanding and contracting. And what they do is set the tone in the system. And all you, in a 4-bar system, all you need to do is push one thing and the muscles stay isometric and isotonic, which is the most energy efficient. And we're back to the second law of thermodynamics. What is the most efficient way of using a muscle? The most efficient way is to keep it isometric and isotonic. So all you do is tense your muscle. It expands auxetically when it does that most of the time. And then you just set the 4-bar system running by moving things. Hopefully you get gravity to do it rather than in a muscle, another muscle to do it. So if you could set it up so that gravity is doing your work for you, like this is, and this just brings it down. So all the effort is just flipping this one. Everything else is gravity. So if you get your body to do that, then life is easy.
All right. Do we have any other comments, questions? Does anybody want to?
Yeah, Wilbur is muted.
Yeah, I was saying yes. I agree with what Steve says about the muscles behave isotonically and so forth. That's always true. And gravity is a combination of the systems. They cannot work independently because gravity will set the momentum and you have to, but the tension has to always be there. The system for efficiency in terms of minimizing energy has to work in that concept, in that way.
You mean to be optimized, Wilbur?
Optimized, yes, for optimization, for efficiency. And the idea is to have minimal amount of energy expenditure for dynamic capacity. And that's the way, that's the laws of nature. You
Yeah,
don't
yeah,
want
but
to
you see, but look, this is what we're having now, right? So you see, now we're discussing this from a completely like next level of justification. From we're looking at it from the most general solution, like as Tensegrity as the super stable configuration that, you know, for any kind of frameworks. So the tensed frameworks that maintain the stability at minimal expense. So this is from the architectural standpoint, I think that this is really the super important thing.
Do we have
That we-
time? Yeah, Chris, do we have time for one more question? I know we're getting close to 3 hours. Amazing.
I've just invited Daniel to come up and ask his question.
Oh,
Do
great.
you want to do that, Daniel? You'll need to unmute.
Is that working now? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Daniel.
Hey, Susan. Yeah, so my question was rather than sort of contracting a localized muscle and then expanding, etc., in that way, is it possible from the, let's say, center of mass out the whole thing at the same time? That seems to be an efficient way to deal with external forces rather than localized contraction.
I think yes, right? The whole body condenses. Steve, you talk about kids when you ask them to stand up because you're going to measure their height and they expand in all directions, right? Steve, you're muted. Sorry.
Yeah, I'm unmuting. Yes, right. I think it's a whole, as I said, I think you set the whole tone of all your muscles and try and keep them at that tone level. But you know, when you're measuring a kid, as pointed out, you say, how do you get, you know, stand up, I want to measure you. They take a deep breath and they whole expand in all directions. So our whole body expands auxetically as well as the individual muscles and all the individual structures will do that. But as I said, if you set your tone of muscles at a particular tone and keep it that way, that's when you're most energy efficient. So you want to keep your muscles isometric and isotonic.
Great. And Paul Thornley says, isn't that the movement of a dancer? Isn't that a good example of what Daniel's talking about? And Daniel's a Wing Chun guy. He's a martial arts guy. So he's looking at it from that perspective as well. And Anastasia, I know you have a lot of dance experience. I imagine you'd completely agree here. Thumbs up. And Lisa Babiuk says, so we're using gravity to develop more efficient tension compression systems, tenso-compressional systems. Right, I think we're recruiting.
Well, but
those
that's the whole
forces, right?
point, right? Is that you see that this is the whole point of the clear distinction, right? So that that you know, at first, if we look at it, the gravity, the external forces, they are your enemies, right? Because that's the very first level is for any kind of system to get its own self-identity. So what would be the properties what would be the architecture that would hold it together at the level of stability in first place? And then comes the next question, kind of the post-stability question. How you can use the external factors to your best advantage, right? So to minimize the tax and maximize the benefits of the external forces. And that will be all this kind of next trick. So in that respect, when we talk about the muscles as the turnbuckles which are inserted in the system, the benefit of the muscle it's a post stabilization thing which allows all post-stable configurations which are then allowing to get the maximum benefits of the external forces.
Great. And Anastasia, can you unmute? Thank you, Leonid. Yeah, because you've got a great question here.
I can't unmute. Oh, I am unmuted. Okay. Steve, hi. I'm just going to cut to the chase. In your talk, Steve, you talked about how mesostructure overrides microstructure regarding triangles. It kind of stuck in my craw because it kind of defied the notion of heterarchy and the idea of icosahedrons at different relative scales. Did I misunderstand something about mesostructure?
Yeah, well, again, when you're talking about meso-microstructure, it depends again on what scale you're looking at it. So within that particular scale, you may be talking about it in a particular way. So that there may be an overlying, icosahedron that does it all, or subsections of one in that particular level of scale that you're working in.
Okay, let's apply it like Leonid talked about bone and the auxetic principles of bone. And if you look at say we're looking at microstructure at a cellular level, and we're looking at a cellular level structure, but then you can also look at the whole bone itself as a part within the tensegrity of the leg, let's say.
Right.
I'm seeing them as so the larger scale, I guess it can be subsumed. The smaller scales can be within.
That's the whole point. That's why, you see, that's the whole idea, that the border, the first border of kinematic indetermination belongs to the organism as a unit, from unicellular body to the trillion cellular body. This is the value of tensegrity, right? So you see that and that's where we are moving that's the difference that's a continuity here. So once we are at the most general solution for the superstability, that allows us to avoid this usual divide, right? So you see, like, here is Donald Ingber with his Harvard associations and the cell, and it's a microstructure and tensegrity accepted. And here you are, guys, like sitting there at the corners of the world and talking about the macro biotensegrity, which nobody understands. So the higher, and why that happens, because differences of scales, that's exactly like in my example from paper. If you solve, if you are using virtual plus material and saying, oh, you know what, this is the application, this kind of 80-gram papers, you can do this origami, and 100-gram papers, you can do this origami. If you take a foil, you can do this origami. So this variety exists, but then the question of mathematics is, what is the highest possible level? What would be the most general property of paper? And let's solve for that. And this is what we're having. Like, once we move to this higher math, this is what we're having. It's the same math for the cell and for the organism. And that's really critical, because the engineering for the organism and for the self is different. But the fundamental underlying big architecture mass is the same. That's really the critical breakthrough that we're talking about, that getting the right sources, and to end this debate with biomechanics.
There we go. Joanne,
Yes,
can you
so-
unmute? Are you ready to ask your question? And I think, folks, that's going to have to be the last one, because we're going on.
Yeah, no, I asked my question, Leonid. My question was, why did you say gravity is the external forces? How do you describe external forces as your enemy? What do you mean?
Well, I mean, if you are an entity, if you're an organism, right? You are the entity. So basically, everything outside the border puts you at risk of falling apart. So,
I
first
just
thing,
can't follow that. I'm sorry. We're talking about the tissue of variability and adaptation as a collective. Gravity is not an exclusive force to me that's attacking me or that's my enemy. We're an integrated. I'm in a relationship with the trees and the sky. And
but no.
How can it be one side of a coin? That undermines everything you've said.
No.
Yes.
Okay, John, let's put it like this, right? So let's put it this way. Are we talking about, we need to identify some, there has to be some identity to the system.
Which system?
You know, me, you, any
We're
other
not an
system.
exclusive system. We're a living system on a living system in a living system, whichever scale you're on. Nothing's an enemy. We're all seeking homeostasis. We're all seeking
Correct.
coherence. We're all seeking subtle balance of forces. I'm challenging the use of the word enemy because that's a very negative connotation. As if my
okay. So you see, I mean, I'm not putting it in the negative sense. I'm putting,
what's good about an enemy?
Well, okay, so let's put it like this.
It's important. It's huge because otherwise biotensegrity is literally challenging as if we're on opposite sides of something, and we are hierarchical and heterarchical.
Okay.
And all the value.
John, let me just get this part. Let me get this part. So we have a certain range of external stressors. Depending on the ability of the system itself to integrate those stressors, it could either be converted into the internal benefit used as a source of energy, or it could be harmful to the system, right? Yeah. Would we agree on that?
That's the balance, right? You're seeking the balance, whatever it has to be.
Well, you see what I'm saying, I'm just putting it in a more technical way. I'm just saying that there is a range of the external, you know, there's a range of the external mechanical stressors. The range of the external mechanical stressors that are beneficial to you, that you are able to absorb and integrate into the system, that's the range of your mechanical homeostasis.
Yeah, if a truck comes and hits me, I get squished.
Yeah, that's it. But then would be, so that in that sense, it would be just the intensity of the stressor, right? So you see, my point is that, and that in first place, you know, the external stressors, they challenge the system, whether it's able to integrate those stressors or not.
But challenge is so important. I mean, think about a baby eagle, for example, born in a tree. If that eagle goes to move out of its nest too young and falls, it hasn't built up its power through integrating and responding to external forces and learned and acquired sufficient adaptability to meet homeostasis at the next level. That's surely our purpose. But if we start saying air is an enemy of the eagle, that eagle's in shit. So what I'm saying is that every single system has to adapt in time. There's no enemy.
That was a figure of speech. The same thing, right? As Anastasi told me, you know, say that, you know, he made the comment that Iliacus is not existent, right? So you see, of course, it exists, but it's very depleted, right? So I mean, am I allowed for some metaphor or for some kind of, you know, accentuation, or?
So I think we can all agree that we evolved in a gravitational field.
Right. Of
and
course.
we've optimized organismically to that, and we're harnessing the advantages of that gravitational pull and using it in as optimal a way as we can, any organism. And
yeah, but you see, but my whole point is this. What was this whole point of conversation?
Well, wait, Leonid, and I think what we're getting into, I'm just going to say, is the sort of next session of New Frontiers. This is anti-fragility stuff, right?
Yeah,
where that force of gravity is actually an advantage. Those
but that's you see that the key point there is that we can only discuss this and as advantage, like anything external, we can only discuss that as the post internal stability, right? That's really what I would continue to return. Internal stability, whether that's what we want to identify, you know, the internal workings, the internal force resolutions, regardless of the external sources. That's really, and that's what we find in Tensegrity, that the Tensegrity is the mathematical framework that highlights that, well, how are you going to get the super stable configuration? What would be the self-stabilizing situation at the minimal energy cost, regardless of the materials, regardless of the distances, regardless of whatever? That would be That's where we're moving there. And regardless whether you put it in the water, regardless whether you put it in the air and so on, there's a range which was that where it's kind of mutually compatible. But we have to accept that this range is relatively small. You know, that's why life is a relatively small range there.
All right. And it looks like Wilbur is desperately trying to get our attention. Wilbur,
He's desperately trying to say bye-bye, right?
yeah, it is time to say bye-bye. What do you have, Wilbur?
Yeah, I want to say bye-bye, but Susan, you said it. I mean, we have to think about it this way, Leonard. And I wrote the comment about, I don't think gravity is an enemy, as you said, and Joanne addressed, brought up the question. The thing is that which was here first? We as a being came into the universe, and we had to adapt or evolve to manage whatever was in this universe. So if it's an enemy, then it's not really an enemy. It's a part of the system that was involved in our evolution as a single cellular organism.
So, oh yeah, of course.
So
of course. Once again, this is a shaping force, you know.
Hang on a sec, Leonard. So I think the whole concept around tensegrity, the cells evolve the way they do, and the explanation of tensegrity to explain the behavior of internal forces in cells and how they respond to external forces, that's what makes sense. We cannot say it's an enemy. It's not, because we evolved as a result of it. Something was first. And as far as we know from physics and from quantum physics, the cell was not first. That's as far as we know. I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong. But I think the language has to be careful how we use that language, because it's a necessity. Otherwise, we won't exist. So I don't know if it's an enemy.
Well, this is good. We have a lot of fuel for next time. And I'm wondering, maybe we can give Steve, you want to have the last word on this?
Well, I just want to thank everybody for coming. I think it was wonderful. But just to end the note on this thing, that all organisms' initial involvement is gravity free. In utero, you're gravity free. In an egg, you're gravity free. And in whatever the plant seed is, you're gravity free. So you start out as the organism independent of gravity, and your body is, your internal structures are independent of gravity, and then you adapt to gravity. Make sense? Well, goodbye all. I think it was wonderful.
I can't wait till next time. This is great.
We'll have to figure out another one of these mega sessions.
And next week we're going to have Maren, and Mariana's going to interview her. So if you don't have Maren's book.
That's right. I've got it here. If anybody's still watching.
And if you think it's a book about horses, well, there are horses in there. It's a book about biotensegrity, folks. Make no mistake. Thank you, everybody. Cheers.
Thank you.
Thank you. Cheers.
Thank you.
See you next week.
Bye all.
Bye.